The Bronze Age introduced dozens of ambitious new heroes, anti-heroes, and supporting characters as DC experimented with bold ideas and changing audiences. Some were heavily promoted, others headlined their own series, and many looked destined to become the next generation of icons. Yet, as the years passed, reboots, shifting editorial priorities, and evolving tastes quietly pushed them out of the spotlight. Today, even longtime fans barely remember many of these once promising creations. Which Bronze Age characters did DC leave behind and seemingly hope everyone forgot? Here are 10 Bronze Age characters DC wants you to forget. At number 10 is Tyrock. In a desperate attempt to chase the mid-70s blaxploitation and disco trends, DC Comics introduced Tyrock in Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 216. Eager for a black hero in the 30th century, editorial mandated his creation, but the execution became a profound PR disaster. Writer Cary Bates and artist Mike Grell were tasked with his creation, though Grell reportedly found the mandate embarrassing, resulting in a highly dated costume featuring a plunging V-neck, a massive Elvis collar, and white chains. Worse, Tyrock's tone-deaf origin tied him to an isolated, exclusively black island, which unintentionally read as segregationist apologia rather than progressive representation. Recognizing the massive liability, DC quickly shoved the character into the background before quietly writing him out of the book entirely, long before the universe-wide reboots of the 1980s. While modern DC has attempted heavily sterilized reimaginings, the original Bronze Age Tyrock remains an embarrassing corporate misfire, strictly locked inside the editorial vault. At number 9 is the original Calculator. Long before Noah Cutler became a serious underworld information broker, the Calculator arrived in Detective Comics number 463 during 1976 as an aggressive attempt to exploit the fleeting pocket calculator fad. Bob Rozakis and Mike Grell crafted a modern Batman antagonist who bizarrely sported a massive number pad upon his chest alongside a glowing visor. In combat, Cutler physically typed on his own torso to compute fighting probabilities and anticipate his opponent's physical moves. This gimmick proved visually absurd and aged terribly upon printing. Fans thoroughly rejected the concept, turning him into an ongoing joke among bullpen creators and destroying his credibility as a genuine threat. Ashamed of the ridiculous aesthetic, publishers quietly buried the character completely. He remained absent following the 1980s continuity shifts until Brad Meltzer wrote Identity Crisis in 2004, mandating a total reinvention. This left his humiliating initial incarnation as an unspoken failure they permanently ignored. At number 8 are the original Super Sons. Long before modern audiences embraced the dynamic between Damian Wayne and John Kent, scribe Bob Haney alongside illustrator Dick Dillon introduced the original Super Sons inside the pages of World's Finest Comics issue 215 in the year 1973. This ambitious concept centered on Clark Kent Jr. and Bruce Wayne Jr., functioning as rebellious counterculture teenagers who constantly defied their strict fathers. However, these college-age successors absolutely shattered established canonical logic, leaving devoted fans frustrated by the ongoing timeline inconsistencies. Realizing they had inadvertently aged their premier icons into clueless sitcom patriarchs, management panicked over the resulting narrative mess. To repair the damage, writer Dennis O'Neil executed a hasty, clumsy retcon in issue 263. He officially declared the frustrating pair were never actually real biological offspring, but rather complex computer simulations. Following this bizarre revelation, the digital duo was abruptly powered down and firmly shelved for several decades without any further acknowledgement. And if you think DC only buried one continuity headache, the next few entries prove some Bronze Age creations became so controversial or misguided that editorial quietly pretended they never existed. At number 7 is Black Bison. Jerry Conway and Pat Broderick launched The Fury of Firestorm issue 1 in 1982, featuring Black Bison as the primary antagonist. The company sought to weave serious social commentary about Native American rights and systemic oppression directly into a mainline superhero narrative. Unfortunately, the printed execution resulted in an offensive, wildly caricatured catastrophe. John Ravenhair served as a museum curator who became possessed by the vengeful spirit of an ancient ancestor, seeking brutal retribution against white citizens through a magical coup stick. His dialogue felt incredibly stilted, relying heavily upon regressive Hollywood tropes that ultimately alienated the specific marginalized demographic the publisher had intended to champion. Realizing they had created a culturally radioactive liability, executives quietly shuffled him away from center stage. Today, writers deliberately avoid acknowledging his existence, viewing this highly insensitive misstep as a disastrous chapter best left completely buried in the publisher's archives. At number 6 is Lady Cop, debuting in First Issue Special Issue 4 back in 1975. Lisa Warner was writer Robert Canier and artist John Rosenberger's attempt to capture both the gritty exploitation 1970s television market and the growing momentum of second-wave feminism. But this foray into hard-boiled police drama missed the mark entirely. The main protagonist joined the police force only after witnessing the killer in boots slaughter her roommates and leave a bloody boot at the crime scene. Penned by an older male author attempting to sound liberated, the resulting dialogue came across as highly chauvinistic. The extreme violence also felt wildly exploitative, making the supposed empowerment theme seem deeply flawed and hypocritical. Unsurprisingly, this tryout issue failed to secure an ongoing series. Lady Cop was subsequently shoved into the darkest corners of the company's archives. She remained entirely forgotten during later universe-altering events, and her original appearances remain unprinted today because of their notoriously schlocky depiction of gender-based violence. At number 5 is The Ten-Eyed Man. Seeking a visually shocking antagonist grounded in wartime anxieties, Frank Robbins debuted Philip Reardon within the pages of Batman issue 226 in 1970. This lethal Special Forces veteran lost his eyesight during a catastrophic warehouse explosion. Desperate for a cure, a shady underworld doctor surgically connected Reardon's optic nerves directly to his fingertips. However, this biological gimmick was functionally absurd, instantly ruining the villain's intimidating premise. Because his new sensory organs were located on his hands, they were painfully vulnerable during melee combat. Readers actively mocked the concept, realizing the caped crusader could effortlessly defeat this supposedly elite killer simply by tossing a thorny plant or throwing a heavy brick. Humiliated by how illogical the physics proved, editors utilized the massive multiverse collapse to unceremoniously discard him completely via shadow demons. Since then, modern creators are strictly forbidden from treating the character as a serious threat anymore. At number 4 are the original Outsiders. Years prior to the Dark Knight assembling his famous covert operations team, legendary writer Joe Simon and artist Jerry Grandinetti launched an entirely different squad bearing that exact moniker within First Issue Special Number 10 during 1976. Instead of sleek urban vigilantes, this bizarre iteration featured a grotesque gathering of mutant oddities, prominently starring figures like Lizard Johnny, Mighty Mary, and the four-armed Amazing Ronnie. The premise attempted to capitalize on misfit ensemble dynamics, but fundamentally failed to resonate with contemporary readers. The chaotic character designs and lack of compelling narrative direction ensured the concept never secured a dedicated ongoing publication. Recognizing a dead end, publishers unceremoniously abandoned the strange property altogether. By 1983, executives officially reassigned the valuable title directly to Bruce Wayne and his new superhero strike force. This strategic rebranding allowed them to aggressively bury the original mutant lineup, ensuring those inaugural members remained permanently obscured by successful namesakes. But now, we're down to DC's most unforgettable Bronze Age disasters. Bizarre experiments and failed ideas so embarrassing that the publisher has spent decades keeping them out of the spotlight. At number 3 is Hercules Unbound. Eager to capitalize on the soaring popularity of cinematic dystopian landscapes, publishers tapped writer Jerry Conway alongside artist José Luis Garcia Lopez to launch a bizarre fusion concept in 1975. The resulting premiere issue forcefully dropped classical mythology's most famous blind demigod straight into a desolate radioactive wasteland, crawling with irradiated mutant boars and atomic knights. However, marrying ancient Hellenic legends to a bleak nuclear Armageddon created an absolute narrative disaster. This baffling genre mashup managed to alienate traditional fantasy purists while simultaneously repelling hardcore science fiction enthusiasts. Worse, the grim setting violently clashed with established mainline continuity, ensuring the title struggled to secure any dedicated readership. Given the opportunity to streamline their sprawling multiverse during post-crisis continuity cleanups, editors quietly abandoned this confusing future timeline. Following this reset, the hero cleanly reverted to his traditional mythological origins alongside Wonder Woman, leaving the radioactive wastelands completely forgotten. At number 2 is Goody Rickles. In one of the most perplexing synergy attempts in print history, a bizarre doppelganger bearing the exact likeness of insult comedian Don Rickles arrived inside Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen issue 139 during 1971. Conceived to generate mainstream celebrity crossover appeal, this surreal edition featured Jimmy Olsen and Morgan Edge interacting with a chaotic figure hurling insults while stumbling into a bizarre plot involving UFOs and Intergang. This fourth wall-breaking fever dream shattered the established tone of the ongoing cosmic narrative. Fans seeking serious mythological world-building felt deeply alienated by the jarring comedic intrusion, which aged exceptionally poorly once that specific brand of humor faded from cultural relevance. While DC proudly reprints this historical oddity in Jack Kirby's collected editions today as a piece of surreal comic history, the Goody Rickles persona remains a bizarre corporate fever dream completely divorced from any serious modern storylines. At number 1 is Prez. Aiming to capture the newly enfranchised youth vote following the ratification of the 26th Amendment, celebrated visionary Joe Simon launched Prez number 1 during 1973. This ambitious solo title centered on America's first adolescent commander-in-chief, designed to deliver biting anti-establishment satire. Instead, subscribers received an incoherent, hallucinatory scramble that had no idea who its target audience was. Rather than grounding the narrative in relatable teen struggles or sharp governance critiques, the young leader inexplicably battled a corrupt politician sporting a giant yellow smiley face, squared off against militias commanded by an amputee sniper, and ultimately fought Dracula. Unsurprisingly, this chaotic concoction repelled both standard superhero buyers and the elusive younger demographic alike, resulting in a swift cancellation after merely 4 installments. While the original Bronze Age run was a commercial failure that vanished from the mainline continuity, Prez actually survived as a massive cult favorite among top DC creators, though modern legends like Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison frequently reference him in prestige books. The chaotic, smiley face-punching 1973 original incarnation remains an embarrassing anomaly kept safely out of the spotlight. These forgotten Bronze Age heroes deserve another look. Comment your favorite, subscribe now, and turn on notifications for more DC history.